Hi everybody, Penny here. Welcome to my kitchen. I have Caitlin with me here again today. Say hi for the people. Hey. So today we are making freezer coleslaw. So spring is here, summer's coming.
Yes, in June.
Yes, in June, that's right. And it would be great to have a few things in the freezer or in the pantry that you can just pull out, you know, for a spontaneous barbecue or picnic or something like that. So this is freezer coleslaw. So what I have in this big bowl is 1 medium head of cabbage, 1 small onion, 3 smallish carrots, but if you have 1 good sized carrot, that's great, and a couple of stalks of celery. And I've shredded them all in the food processor. If you want to do it by hand, go for it. I don't have that much patience, so it's all in the food processor for me. Then we sprinkled it with probably 1.5 teaspoons of salt and just let it sit for a while. So while that was sitting in a small saucepan, we put 2 cups of sugar, 1 cup of vinegar, and 1 teaspoon of celery seeds. So we bring that to a boil, let it simmer for about a minute, and then let it come to room temperature. So that's at room temperature. So we're going to mix it in with our shredded vegetables. Make sure we get all that celery seed. There we go. Caitlin, can you lay that back over on the counter for me? And we have to make sure we stir that thoroughly. And this is a basic coleslaw recipe. So once we get this mixed and whatnot, then I'll explain to you how you can jazz it up a little bit when it comes out of the freezer just before you're going to serve it. But this is just your basic coleslaw. And these vegetables freeze really well and retain their crunchiness. The recipe also called for a green bell pepper. Now I'll tell you in a little bit, I've got some freezer tips for you about freezing bell peppers, which you can, but they don't retain their crunchiness. So I didn't want to put them in here with this. So there we go. I think that looks pretty good. I'll just lay that over there out of the way. Now you can freeze this in a bottle like this. Any bottle. Doesn't have to be a mason jar because you're not looking for the seal necessarily. You're just looking to contain the food. So, but when you freeze things, you should leave about 1 inch from the top because things tend to expand when they freeze. So leave about 1 inch from the top of the jar. Make sure you label it really well and then throw it in your freezer. Or you can use, you know, like a freezer container, a plastic freezer container that's meant for the freezer. But today we are going to use a combination of an actual freezer baggie along with some sandwich baggies. So I don't want to freeze all of this in here even though it would fit. I want to freeze it in serving sizes. So there's 3 of us. So typically it's about, I don't know, between 1/4 cup and 1/2 cup of coleslaw is a serving. So what we're going to do, I have my big freezer bag labeled freezer coleslaw, and you need to thaw it in the fridge about 8 hours or the night before you want to serve it, and then drain it really well because it will be liquidy. So you want to drain it before you serve it. So we're going to fill up our sandwich baggies, and Caitlin's going to continue to do this for me while we talk about some other stuff. I'm just going to use the scoop because it's easier to get in here. So we're going to put our coleslaw in our sandwich baggies. And then once they're... That's stuff I'm going to talk to them about in just a few minutes. So once you get your freezy baggie full, then you can seal it and we'll put it in the bigger bag. So I'm going to give all this over to Caitlin. There you are.
Are you having all that for supper tonight or what?
No, that's not for supper tonight. That's to go in the freezer. So there's more baggies. And you can just fill them up and then we'll put them in the freezer. Okay, so I'm going to grab a seat and I'm going to show you some stuff that can be frozen for convenience sake and, you know, rather than having food wastage. So I'm going to show you a few things that I actually have in the freezer, which is what we have here. So first of all, you can do vegetable scraps. And I didn't take one of those out. Excuse me for a second. Okay, so I've talked about this before, but whenever you're peeling your vegetables, chopping up your celery, peeling your carrots, you know, all that kind of stuff, your onions, including your onion skins, maybe not the outside ones that you take off, but the ones you have to physically peel off, your onions. Onion skins add a lovely color to broth. So this is one of 2 bags that I now have in the freezer. Look, Caitlin, good job. Look at that, awesome. So when you go to make a vegetable stock, you don't have to use, you know, your vegetables that could be used for something else. You can use your scraps. That way there's no wastage. And then after, when you strain your vegetable stock, you can use the then cooked vegetable scraps in your compost if that's something that you do. So it's a win-win, no wastage, it's all good. So that's one of the things that you can easily do. Nuts can easily go in the freezer. I have a big bag of walnuts in the freezer now that I just got from Costco. Much cheaper that way. And just make sure you seal it off in tightly to make sure that it's airtight. And any nut really, walnuts, almonds, peanuts. I have ground flaxseed in the freezer right now that you've seen me use before. And it doesn't freeze solid, but it keeps the nuts from growing rancid because there's natural oil in nuts. You can freeze things like, well, obviously this is cabbage. But you can parboil hard vegetables like carrots, turnip, cabbage. And parboiling simply means you put them in boiling water, salted water, for about 2 minutes. You take them out, drain them really well, put them in freezer baggies, get most of the air out as you can, and then freeze it for next time. So if something like cabbage is in season and it's really, really good, it's perfect time to parboil and put it in the freezer. Breadcrumbs. I love to freeze breadcrumbs. You can get day-old bread, you can save your crusts, you can do whatever. This is fantastic because as you can see, it doesn't freeze solid. So if a recipe calls for a half a cup of breadcrumbs, you just open the bag, you take out what you need, and you throw it back in the freezer. Fantastic. And much cheaper than buying the containers of breadcrumbs. Let's see, what else have we got? You can freeze, if you buy dried beans and then cook them, you can freeze beans, not a problem. If you make some baked beans or something like that, easily freeze them. And what I normally do is I will freeze them in a freezer baggie like this. And as you can see, this is flat. So I will fill up the bag, mark it, of course, what it is, and then lay it on a cutting board or a cookie sheet, something flat, and put it in the freezer. And that way it freezes flat and you don't have this clump of something and you don't really know what it is. So beans, soups, stews. The only thing with the soups and stews that I would hesitate would be potatoes, because potatoes don't freeze very well. They get like a funny texture. So that's not something I would recommend to freeze, but you certainly, you know, if you're making potatoes that have like cream cheese and butter and a bunch of stuff like that in it, on a shepherd's pie, for example, that would probably freeze okay. But just a cooked potato, not so much. Alrighty, so cooked beans, butter. If butter is on sale, get a bunch and throw it in your freezer. Hummus. Hummus freezes really, really well. And if you have like a pressure cooker and then, of course, your food processor, you can easily make a huge amount of hummus and throw it in the freezer, and you've got some for every other day. Flour. You can freeze flour, and it's kind of like the breadcrumbs. It won't go hard. It will be cold, obviously, but if flour's on sale, pick up a couple of bags and wrap them in a couple of layers of saran wrap and throw them in the freezer. And that way you can take it out whenever you run out of the other bag that you have already. Fresh spinach. So whenever I buy, you know, a box of baby spinach or a container to use in a salad, I never use it all up. And I very seldom cook it because I'm the only one that likes it. So, but everyone will eat it in a salad in our house. So whatever's left over, put it in a freezer baggie, like the tomato soup, and freeze it flat, like I said. Take as much as the air you can get out of there, get the air out. Then, when you have like a chicken soup or a pasta sauce, or a tomato and mushroom and pasta, not really a sauce, but like a roasted, and then throw that in. Perfect. And because you want it flat like the soup, because when it's frozen, you can then take it and break it up. So essentially what you're doing is chopping your spinach, even though it's frozen, in the bag, and then throw it in your soup. Wonderful. Look at Caitlin go. She's got 1, 2, 3, 4, 5.5 bags. Perfect. Thank you, Caitlin. She's going to clean up now, so it might get a little noisy, but that's okay. She's an excellent cleaner-upper.
I heard that.
You heard that. That's good. Okay, so that's the spinach. Bananas, of course. Most of us know you can freeze bananas. Take the peel off, chop them up, throw them in a baggie. Again, if you have a lot that you want to freeze, I would recommend doing it in a flat bag on a cookie sheet or cutting board, something like that. And that way it's easy to store, and it's also easier to break off some when you want to use them. Now, as I said, the coleslaw called for some bell peppers. Bell peppers are wonderful to freeze. Chop them up first, throw them in a baggie, and use them in sauces. Things that you're going to heat, sauces, soups, stews, that type of thing. Because they don't retain their crunch. They get really soft, but they retain all their flavor. So if you're going to put it in a soup or a sauce anyway, it's going to get soft. So go for it. Let me see. Fresh tomatoes. So I was talking with a chef a while back, and her name is Emily Richards. She came to the Live and Learn Center one day, spent the whole day with the participants and the staff, never charged a thing, and we had a blast. We cooked all kinds of food, and it was all delicious. But one of her cookbooks is all about freezing as well, and she just chops up her tomatoes. She buys them in season, chops them up, quarters them, and throws them in a bag, just like that. And then when the time comes to make fresh tomato sauce, she's got her fresh tomatoes right out of the freezer instead of having to resort to tinned tomatoes. So if you have a farmer's market nearby, or you grow your own tomatoes, you can easily do that. You might have to get some extra freezer space, but rather than canning, if canning is not a thing that you like to do or want to do or have the equipment to do, you can easily freeze them. Perfect. What else have we got here? Oh, well, of course, soups and sauces without potatoes. We talked about that. And like I said, the same thing with the coleslaw. If you're going to put it in jars, make sure you leave about 1 inch at the top, or freeze it flat like we have with the soup here. Citrus fruit, lemons, limes, especially lemons for me, I guess, because I like it in Diet Coke or, things like that. I like it in water. So slice up your lemons or your limes or any other citrus fruit that you like, and just pat them dry, and then freeze them on a cookie sheet flat. So once they're frozen hard, then you can take them and put them in a bag, and you can just take one out as you need it. So that's a really cool trick, because I often buy a lemon and it sits on the counter and unfortunately they go bad. So that's a good trick as well. Chopped onions. If you know that you have a number of things to cook in the coming couple of weeks, and you have some onions that are just starting to get a little soft, chop them up. Throw 1.5, whatever, in a baggie, like we're doing with the coleslaw today, and then you can save your onions and you don't have to chop them. Berries, blueberries, raspberries, even grapes. You can freeze those as well for baking or salads or whatever you want to do down the road. It's similar to the citrus fruits. You want to freeze them flat on a cookie sheet on a piece of parchment paper so they don't stick to the cookie sheet. Same thing with the citrus fruit. And then what I do is I measure out a half a cup of the blueberries because that's normally what I would put in muffins or whatever. So each baggie would be a half a cup of blueberries. And then they don't stick together because they're frozen individually on the cookie sheet first. Celery. If you know you're going to be, making a tomato sauce or something that you want celery to be really finely chopped for, put it in the freezer. Put it in like 1-inch chunks and then put it in the freezer baggie or a container, and it will chop up perfectly in a food processor. Celery in a food processor that's fresh tends to be a little stringy, but freezing it works really well. So leftover wine, leftover stock, leftover herbs in a little bit of water, leftover pesto, that type of thing, tomato paste, you can freeze in ice cube trays. And I do that with Molly's soup. I'll show you. So I make homemade soup for Molly. It's because of a medical reason, but there it is, an ice cube of Molly's soup. She gets 2 ice cubes every night with her supper. Sorry, I can wipe my hands. She gets 2 ice cubes every night with her supper, and that's what I do. I make a pot for her, and then I freeze it in ice cubes. Sorry?
Good.
You're good. You're awesome. All done. Thank you. Okay, so you can do that with wine. Like I said, you can do it with stock. You can do it with herbs. The herbs, like if you buy fresh basil, any fresh herb, and you don't use it all up. Of course, you don't want it to go bad. So if you're going to put it in stews or soups or something later that you don't need it to be fresh, put it in an ice cube tray, a little bit of water, and let it freeze. And then, of course, take it out. Make sure you label your bags so you know what they are. Same thing, like I said, with pesto, tomato paste. You often open a jar of tomato paste and you only use, half of it, or not a jar, but a little can. And then, of course, you end up throwing out the other part. Well, if you have, even if it's all ice and you have one left, throw it in there and freeze it. It's all good. Let me see. Oh, green onions and celery. So I love green onions and celery all chopped up, and like in a tuna salad sandwich or an egg salad sandwich, or even if I'm making a pasta salad, something like that. This is green onions all chopped up, 1 serving, which is about 2 green onions or scallions. Little freezer container, popped in the freezer. I've got 2 of those in there now, and don't have to worry about it. It's all done. Okay, what else have we got? Oh my gosh. Cheese. You can, the hard cheese, the hard block of cheese, it can be frozen. However, when it comes out, the texture is a little funny. So I don't freeze hard cheese. However, if you shred it first and then put it in the freezer, because, if you like topping casseroles with cheese and, adding it to different things, so easy, on hand, doesn't freeze solid. And I know you can buy it like that in the grocery store already shredded, but I find it really expensive. So this is a good way to do that. You can freeze Parmesan cheese. This is mine out of the freezer. And again, it doesn't freeze hard because it's already crumbled or shredded. But you can freeze hard Parmesan cheese, not a problem. And it doesn't affect the texture or the taste. So that is really, really, really good to know. What else have we got? Oh my God, I got a whole other page. Okay, pizza dough. Make a couple of batches of pizza dough, throw them in like a baggie or a container, and you've got pizza for whatever night of the week that you want to cook it. Just put it in the fridge either the night before or the morning of, and let it defrost in the fridge. You should always let things defrost in the fridge if at all possible. Barry keeps his ground coffee in the freezer simply because, it lasts longer, keeps fresher. If you cook muffins, you cook banana breads, any type of quick breads, you can easily wrap those up. I would double wrap them in some saran wrap or plastic wrap and freeze them. And then I normally use painter's tape to label things, and I'll show you, along with a Sharpie, because when it's frozen, you think, well, I'll remember what that is. No, you won't. Or I don't anyway. So this is rice. You can easily freeze cooked rice. And this was a container of rice that we got from an Indian restaurant. We didn't even open because there was so much food. So I double wrapped it in saran wrap in the container that it came in. And then of course I wrapped it in the painter's tape. Now the painter's tape is easy to write on, and it's easy to take off, which is very important. Because you don't want to have to be scraping tape off your jars or your containers or so on. So that's what I use. I always have painter's tape. Getting a glass of water?
Yes.
Okay. And of course this is an actual freezer container that you can use. And I happen to know that this is chicken and rice soup, but really I should have put some painter's tape on it because Barry or nobody else is going to know what that is. Okie dokie. You can freeze egg whites. We've talked about that before. Anytime a recipe just calls for a yolk, throw your egg white in a container, and then eventually, if you need egg whites to make a meringue or something like that, or you want to make an egg white omelet, 2 egg whites equals 1 egg if you're looking to do some baking and things like that. Always, always, you don't need to throw out your egg whites. Let me see, cookie dough. If you make a batch of cookie dough, you can freeze it like in an ice cream container type thing, like just full on, or you can shape your cookies first and freeze them individually on a cookie sheet in the freezer. And then when you want to have a cookie or a couple of cookies, but you don't want to have like 2 dozen cookies in the house because you're going to eat them, which is what I would do, you can just take out, 1 or 2 or maybe 4, depending on who's there, and cook your individual cookies. I think that's an awesome idea. Woohoo! All right, casseroles and no potatoes, though, like we talked about before, unless you're mixing in, like I said, a bunch of butter, cream cheese, other things to help stabilize the potatoes. So here's the thing. If you have a casserole dish and you're making, for example, a lasagna, line your dish overhanging with saran wrap or plastic wrap on all sides. Assemble your casserole like you normally would before you put it in the oven. But don't put it in the oven. Wrap it with the plastic wrap on all sides. Put it, dish and all, in your freezer. When it's frozen several hours later, take it out, and all you're going to have to do is lift it out of your casserole dish and then wrap it again, and then wrap it in tin foil, and then with your painter's tape, label it. Then your dish can go back in the cupboard, and the casserole can go back in the freezer for whenever it is that you want to use it. So when you want to use it, take it out, unwrap it, put it in the dish, put dish and all in the fridge, let it defrost, and then bake your casserole. I think that's just awesome. Easy peasy. Okay, so I think that's all I have for the freezer things. It's all good. So, back to our freezer coleslaw. You need to, when it comes out, like I said earlier, at least 8 hours in the fridge, maybe the night before might be better, and then drain it well. And once you drain it well, and you're just before you're ready to serve it, then you can add all kinds of stuff, because this is just your basic freezer coleslaw. You can finely chop up bell peppers. You can shred some zucchini. You can shred some apples. Apples and coleslaw is really, really nice. And just squeeze a little bit of lemon juice over them before you add them, and they won't go brown. Fresh herbs, a bit of parsley, a bit of chives, whatever you like. Salt and pepper, obviously, to taste. Seeds. You often buy the salad topper that has like the sunflower seeds and the dried cranberries and the pine nuts and all that kind of stuff. Throw some seeds in there. That would be really cool. Some dried fruits, like we just talked about, finely chopped. Cucumbers, you can slice them, dice them, shred them. Radishes, I love radishes, and it's a nice hard vegetable. Green onions and scallions. So of course, you've got your coleslaw, you've got your green onions, throw them together. Perfect. So I think that's all my ideas for the freezer. I hope we've learned something and got some ideas, and I hope you give it a go. So let me know if you do. I hope you enjoy. Bye. Take care.